Okay, so good morning and welcome to the second panel discussion on day 2 of our One Nucleus Building Life Science Adventures Careers Conference. So a very warm welcome to the panel who have joined us today. What a sterling lineup. We're very privileged to have all of these experts with us today, and also to the delegates who've dropped in. Thank you so much for making the time. So the topic for this discussion is being an entrepreneur a career? And I'm very much looking forward to the conclusion of the discussion, like I'm sure many of our delegates are, but also just learning from the insights and the experience of our panelists. And so far, the conference has been a sterling example of how shared experiences can sort of help others with their own progression. So I'm really, again, thank you to the panel members for sharing your time with us. So from a One Nucleus perspective, just to sort of say, if you are a delegate, then please remain muted and camera not on if you're not part of the panel. As with all of the panel discussions, we are recording them, and we are delighted to be able to make those available as on demand post the panel discussion. And we encourage it to be interactive. So the chat box is enabled. So if you'd like to drop your comments and questions in during the discussion, then Alan Boyd, who is our moderator, has kindly accepted the multitasking challenge of leading the discussion. And also I'm keeping an eye on the chat box. I'll also be there in the background as well, Alan, so I can keep an eye on that too. So just to all delegates, please use this as an opportunity to submit your own thoughts and considerations as well. So with that, Alan, I'm going to hand to you and the panel to take us away. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Lucia, for that introduction. And as I say, my name's Alan Boyd, and though I don't consider myself an entrepreneur, people keep telling me I am, which is an interesting, but we'll come back to that. Also, I looked up, given that we've got all these entrepreneurs as well on the panel, I tried to look up what you get as what's a group of entrepreneurs known as. I couldn't come up with a definition, but I did wonder about a cache of entrepreneurs. We'll see how that goes. So any answers on the chat box actually would be helpful. So just what we're going to do, I'm going to ask in a moment each of the panelists to just talk briefly about their career and where they've got to today. But perhaps most importantly, I've asked them to just comment on what made them make various decisions in their choice of career as it developed, because that is, I think probably one of the key things that we want to discuss today. Is it a career, or does being an entrepreneur just happen, and things like that. So, and then what we're going to do is we're going to go. We've got questions that we're going to discuss and really have a conversation about what it is actually being an entrepreneur a career. So hopefully we'll get the answer to that. So I'm just going to go around now around the people on my screen. So Jeroen, do you want to go first and just talk about your career briefly and what made you do what you've done?
Yeah, of course. Thanks for the intro there, Alan. So yeah, my name is Jeroen. I'm co-founder and CEO at Semarion. And what we do as a company is we've developed a novel sort of way of assaying adherent cells. And what we've done essentially is we've created a novel microcarrier platform that brings adherent cells into suspension, and we use microfabrication technologies from physics, and we're doing a lot of interesting stuff to accelerate drug discovery, really. But the question is, how did I get here, right? So I think about 8 or 9 years ago, I met my co-founder, and it was because we were both working in an organization which is called QTech, which is a Cambridge-based sort of society that focuses on technology and entrepreneurship. And we worked together there for a while as well, while we were doing our PhDs. And my PhD here in Cambridge was around clinical neurosciences. So I spent most of my time sort of doing cell assays, making new cell models, screening siRNA and cell compounds, etc. as well. And then my co-founder, he was doing his PhD in physics, focusing on sort of microcarrier technologies and on nanomagnetism. And then by the end of our PhDs, we said, like, well, that academic career was interesting, and we developed a lot of interesting papers, but they don't have a whole lot of impact, not yet at least. And we were both quite interested in sort of embarking on an entrepreneurial journey. So we started to butt our heads together and discuss really like, okay, I'm a life scientist. He is a physicist. How can we use our skill sets and our network to come up with a technology that could have a potential impact? So we embarked on that mission. We asked for some funding from the university. We were allowed to do a bit of research for a couple of years, which went quite well. We filed a couple of patents, and then we joined a bunch of sort of accelerator programs, et cetera, to sort of like scale our business ever since. And then, yeah, this is where we are right now, and we're quite pleased with the journey. And it's been amazing as well to be able to work with a co-founder, a close friend, really, on developing this technology. And I think before we embarked on this journey together, I worked in a variety of research institutes, both academic and private, again, very much focused on cancer research and cell model development. And as I said, it's great because being a scientist is quite entrepreneurial in a sense already as well. But I wasn't very satisfied. I went to industry for a while as well, where I was a project manager in a small sort of medtech SME, which was exciting initially for the first couple of months, but I got quite bored quite quickly, honestly, because it's quite a rigid sort of work environment. And I worked in consulting for a while as well, which is a bit more exciting, but again, quite far removed from solving problems and making an impact. So I think what I'm trying to say here is that I embarked on a couple of interesting sort of career paths to just get a flavor of what's out there. And I think they did contribute to the development of my skills, but really sort of that real satisfaction of creating something yourself. That really only came from embarking on that entrepreneurial journey. So that's my lengthy introduction there.
Okay, no, thanks, Jeroen. That's great. And Alan,
yeah, I think a key thing with any career is to have a North Star, because if you don't have a North Star, somewhere to aim for, you don't really know which way is forward. And I was lucky that when I was in school, I developed a big interest in neuroscience, but unfortunately there were no degrees in neuroscience offered in the UK at the time. So I did a degree in biochemistry. And in my second year, I came to my home in Port Talbot, and let it be known that I was planning to hitchhike around Europe for 8-9 weeks. And somebody knocked on my door, a friend, and said he wanted to come with me. And that was Chris Evans. And he's gone on to be very successful in this sector since. So I finished my degree and realized there was an MSc in London in neurochemistry. So I headed there and got on that course. And my North Star refined a bit then, because I wasn't just the brain I was interested in. I was developed an interest in not just knowledge, but knowledge that can be translated. So of all the lecturers that I had, one stood out. It was David Bowen, whose work focused on Alzheimer's disease. And he was the one who discovered the cholinergic deficit in Alzheimer's disease in 1976. And 21 years later, the first drug to treat Alzheimer's disease based on correcting the cholinergic deficit, the deficit in acetylcholine neurotransmission, came onto the market. So there was a great example of translation in action. I then became a faculty member of the Department of Psychiatry at the Institute at the University of Pittsburgh in America, where I focused on Alzheimer's disease, but moved also into the area of traumatic brain injury. So where we pioneered work on traumatic brain injury, showing that therapeutic hypothermia worked in animal models and also in the clinic, and that's our standard measure of care there. I came back in '93 to attend a conference. I met up with Chris, who at this time had formed HigherSteaks, and I asked him for help to come back to the UK. And he said to me that if I form a company, he would help me develop it and grow it. I said, that's great, but I didn't really know much about the pharmaceutical industry. So as it happened, a position turned up in Wyeth, which I applied for. So I came back to the UK in '94 to join Wyeth. At the time, they just bought American Cyanide for $10 billion, and the whole sort of section there in Maidenhead were due to move to the US. They offered me a job, but I decided to stay. So my plan was to work in the industry for a couple of years, learn the ropes, and then form a company. But I had to accelerate that process. Together with Chris and 4 colleagues from Wyeth, we formed the UK's first neuroscience startup company called Cerebras, which went on to become Benalis, and that's now which is listed in the London Stock Exchange. We raised in total £27 million, and in 2002 I left to form another company, Pharmadex, which is a successful contract research organization. So together with Mohammed Alavija, we both put it in £5,000. That was the risk, and then grew the company to be a successful CRO. I left in 2008 to form another company, MS Therapeutics, which has since been sold. I formed a number of other companies along the way, most recently Elixa, MediScience, which is focusing on neurological disorders and my treatment. So it's really very well aligned with my North Star. So that's it from me.
No, thanks, Alan. That's very interesting. It's interesting that Chris Evans has been mentioned a couple of times there. I'll talk about that in a bit because he helped me form a company too, so a while ago. Anyway, Zahra, what about you and where you've come from and what you're doing?
Yeah, hi everybody. So yeah, my name is Zahra. I'm the founder and CEO of CREALLIS, which is the Creative Antibody Solutions company. I really started my interest in science from school and went on to do my degree in biochemistry and PhD. And I was very sure at the end of my PhD, I was going to have an academic career. And that's really what I was focused on. I really loved the science, being in the lab, and I was really good at it as well. And after a couple of postdocs, I was applying for fellowships and finding myself in a situation, maybe some of you might find quite familiar, where I couldn't get a permanent fellowship or my own. I just had to keep applying for another postdoc. But I was still determined to stay in academia. And at the point, there was a job advertised in industry in Cambridge, in a company called Demantis, which was an antibody, one of Greg Winter's antibody engineering companies. And I applied for that as the backup in case I didn't get any of the postdocs. But what happened is that I didn't get any of the other postdocs. That was the only job I got offered. And I reluctantly went into industry going, I'll just do this for a stint and then I'll go back into academia as quickly as possible. Turned out it was probably one of the best decisions I made. And I really learned 15 years ago that was how to develop antibodies for therapeutics. And really that was the sort of crux of it all. I was very good at generating antibodies for a number of therapies. Demantis became GSK and I learned how to put the patient first. So, and I was happy developing antibodies through a pipeline and delivering them on time with all this criteria, and that really enthralled me. And I moved on to other different companies and all in industry, worked at MRC Technology, which now is LifeArc, again in antibody engineering, and finally in a company called Agenus, where I was the head of the innovation group. And it was there really that I started to think about what it took to create a team and what it took to deliver the science, because I was always interested in the science, but I felt like in organizations we were getting it wrong on how to motivate people, how to get them to move the projects forward. And that's all I was really interested in, is getting the projects, moving them forward. But I realized that actually society had changed since I was at school, where I was told what to do and I accepted that. We had young people coming in who wouldn't accept that were told what to do. I had to engage them differently and we had to change the way. And that's where sort of my entrepreneurial idea first came. I'm like, wouldn't it be great to set up an organization that was different in the way that it motivated people and got great science done. So I tried some of these techniques, had a group of friends who believed in what I believed in, and found that the motivation in my team went up. We were really productive. We were a great team. And I thought, actually, this could be done. Now, I come from a background in industry, and I had an idea that had come from my career. And so I actually didn't fall into being an entrepreneur on accident. I purposefully, 4 years, it took me to plan it meticulously. And I left my job strategically about 2 years ago, and took up a job in a very different field, in a very different area, to be able to start a company within a company without bridging the IP or contaminating the IP of the company that I wanted to create, which has worked really well. And, so that's how I did it. Being in industry also meant that I knew what people are looking for in developing a company. And it's not just about having a good idea. You've got to have a good idea. You've got to know how to make what you need to make. You've got to be able to show how you can make money out of this. You've got to be able to have a pipeline of things coming through so that you can sustain yourself and convince investors. So I had that background already from what I've been interacting with in industry, and that really was valuable to me too.
Thanks, Zahra. That's very interesting. Marc, over to you next.
Thanks very much, Alan. So like many of you, or if not all of you, I started off as a scientist and kept that going. So I'm not sure if a scientist is a career these days or more of a vocation, but I hadn't really heard of the word entrepreneur until, you know, things like Dragon's Den and things came on the TV. So certainly didn't start out and think of it that case, but saw that science was very interesting and their ways of commercializing science and hopefully, you know, coming up with new therapies and new technologies that can benefit humanity. So I suppose a bit like Alan, science was the driver. I started off as an academic and then left academia to join large pharma, then left large pharma to found a sort of early stage biotech CRO, which we sold on, and then been through several cycles now of foundation through to trade sale, IPO or licensing activity. So I certainly don't think of myself as an entrepreneur in any sense of the word. And basically the things I've ended up doing have been pretty much dictated by the environment in which I found myself. So as a biologist, I believe it's the environment that drives my behavior rather than anything innate. So I certainly don't think that being an entrepreneur is a career, but I'm putting that out there for discussion.
Thanks, Marc. We'll come back to that, and I like the controversy. That's good. It's always good on a panel. So, Benjamina, last but not least.
So yes, I'm Benjamina, co-founder and CEO of HigherSteaks. I have a slightly less scientific background, so started in an engineering still as a chemical engineer, and while I was doing that, already started looking at different areas, so already looking at marketing and food tech, but also did some research and development in flavoring. And when I graduated, started a small company where we were working on electronics. And I graduated really with a idea of if I did something really, really ambitious, it would be too much. And I didn't have the knowledge to do it yet. And I should do something really simple. And that's going to be easier. Turns out that it wasn't that much easier. And really around 6-7 months in, realized I wanted to do something much bigger. And for me, I went through this horrible exercise where for 20 minutes, I asked myself, why am I doing what I'm doing? And really going deep. And for me, it all came down to people's health. And I knew what I wanted to do next had to be directly related to that. So I then joined an accelerator called Entrepreneur First that takes you pre-ID and pre-team. And while I was there, came across the concept of cultivated meat, which is making meat using cell culture technologies. And for me, that was really, really the way forward. It took the different aspects, both, and I think it's important to do something where you're having the best impact on the world where you want to have it, but also you're doing things that you enjoy. And for me, I knew through the experiences I had in the past that pipetting all day in the lab wasn't what I was best at, but also doing pure marketing, which is what I was doing in my previous business, wasn't what I was best at, and really wanted to be at that intersection of doing what I love doing on an everyday basis, but also having the impact that I want to have. Today, we're a team of 25, hopefully closing very soon our Series A, but raised 4.2 million to date, and based out of Cambridge. That's me.
No, thanks very much. And with my background, just so you're aware, I mean, I trained in medicine and biochemistry a long while ago, and then I worked in hospital practice, becoming actually going to be an academic clinical pharmacologist. But then I was persuaded to join industry in the mid 1980s, and I joined Glaxo first to set up one of their first phase 1 units. Stayed there a few years, and then was recruited up to ICI, which became Zeneca. They sent me out to Canada to establish the Canadian business there when the patent laws changed in the early 90s. And I ended up as global head of medical research. But then when they merged with Astra, I wasn't Swedish, and I think there were other reasons I didn't survive. One thing that happened to me, going out to Canada gave me a very different view of headquarters, of an international headquarters. And they also sent me to business school for a month before I became head of medical research. And it made me think differently. And one thing I used to get frustrated with I saw things inside Zeneca that I felt we could improve upon and change. So I was quite challenging. So it didn't surprise me. I didn't make the cut when the two companies merged. You know, one level below the board, people don't get a seat. But I went in totally the opposite direction and helped found ARC Therapeutics, spin out from University College London, one of the first gene therapies in the world. This was 1998, 99. And back to Chris Evans, because Chris was our first investor. He put 3 million into it, and we built the company. We floated on the main London market and raised in the end about 150 million. And I took the first gene therapy up to registration, Serapro with EMA. Didn't make it, but there were reasons. I think it was probably just too early, so we closed the company down. And then set up my own consultancy and now help small and large, small, medium-sized universities translate their ideas into medicines, do a lot of advanced therapy work. So I said, I don't consider myself an entrepreneur, but other people do. And I just looked up the definition, the Oxford English Dictionary, of what an entrepreneur is. And it's a person who sets up a business or businesses to supply goods and services, taking a financial risk in the hope of making a profit. But the thing I would also add from my perspective is I am a doctor first, and I want to help patients, and that's what I think is driving as well a lot of us. So I just want to open up now for questions, and please do use the chat box if you've got questions for us. But just ask everybody, did you in your your role and what you did you have a mentor that you could turn to, or was it all by chance? I mean, I have a sentence that I use quite frequently in growing companies, and that is, experience is something you've got 10 minutes after you needed it. So if you just think about that. But did any of you have a mentor or somebody that helped guide you?
Go ahead, Zahra.
I think for me, mentors have been key throughout my entire career, and actually would never be able to do it without them. So, I mean, the mentors at different stages of your life, you find people that help you, advise you and guide you. It wasn't an official mentor, it was just people who happened to be placed at the right place, and you kind of confide in them. This is my dream, this is what I'd like to do. And they give you that support, they connect you with other people. And it's really like I have a whole network of mentors now, people who I've assigned as mentors, people who've assigned themselves as my mentors. We all are familiar with that. And actually that's key. It's always surround yourself by people who are motivating you and moving you forwards.
Yeah. Benjamina?
No, so I definitely agree. I think there's always that perspective of you have one mentor and you go to that mentor for kind of absolutely everything. And I think, similarly to Zahra, I've taken the approach of really going to several people, knowing that specific issue, that person is best. Or sometimes you want to have two opinions because you don't want it to be too tainted by one person's experience. So, I think, and especially as scientists, you always say at least 3, right? So I think for me, it's been really, really important to have that support network and people that are in a way miles ahead, and people that are maybe slightly in advance, but also peers that are going through similar situations at the same time. And I think the combination of all those and combination of experiences in similar sectors, but different sectors, is important. So I personally found it the most helpful to have a mixture of mentors and support system in a way, rather than having maybe one mentor that I always kind of go to.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of unofficially unofficial mentors as well.
That's it. No, I think I agree with that. I mean, one thing that Chris Evans said to me in the very early days, when he put his 3 million into the company, he said, Alan, whatever you're doing and working on a daily basis, just think, is this adding value to the business? If not, don't do it, and I won't shout at you. So it's that sort of thing. Jeroen, did you have a mentor? Do you have mentors?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with Benjamina and Zahra as well, that I had a bunch of mentors, I think, some that I saw more regularly than others. I mean, there was mention of Domantis, so spoke quite a lot with Ian Tomlinson, for example, as well. And I think I try to sort of like get some mentors, both from entrepreneurs who did it themselves, maybe some people in the sort of investment sphere as well, some scientists. So I think you do want to surround yourself with a bunch of interesting people. What I find challenging sometimes as well is that if you do speak to a lot of people, which I do advise because you can't do this in silo, you get a lot of different opinions and sometimes very conflicting opinions. And I've seen people as well who got so much advice that they are at a stalemate and they get decision fatigue, that they're like, oh, all this advice, I don't know what to make of it. But in the end, you have to sort of be good as well at taking all that advice and doing what you think is right to some extent as well. But again, I think it's ever so important to go and speak to as many people, relevant people, of course, as possible, because I've also seen people who said, like, I have a great idea, but I don't want to tell it to anybody because they might steal it from me. I think that's a bad idea. Just go out and speak to as many people as possible.
Yeah. Alan, Mark, any comments on this one?
Yeah, I think to be an entrepreneur, you have to be multidisciplinary because it covers such a wide range, and it's very difficult to be expert in all areas. So you need people that you can trust for advice along the way, because you've got to move from the molecular interactions of a particular drug at a target to the market dynamics of a particular therapy. So it's a wide range. So having people that you trust, which is key, that can advise you along the way.
Yeah, Mark.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd agree with all the others rather boringly that, I think mentor sounds a bit like Star Wars, where you've got a master and apprentice and all of that sort of stuff. Whereas in fact, it's much more of a support network. And I think the very definition of a company is it's more than one person, right? If you're going to be one person, it's a sole trader. Whereas a company is a group of people working together and supporting each other. And I mean, I think broadly, as human beings or human primates, we like to sort of, a company often means a group of around 100, and certainly I found is when it grows to more than 100 people, my brain ceases to function and I move on and start again. So maybe there's something deeply biological in the way that we interact.
Yeah, well, let me pick up on that, Mark, because I know in your introduction you said being an entrepreneur is more a vocation than a career. So, I mean, one question is being an entrepreneur in your genes, or is it something that can be learned? Do you want to start on that one, Mark?
Well, I think I'm not going to make they're probably much better geneticists on listening in today than me. So I'm going to be very careful what I say about human evolution now. No, I think my view, certainly personally, it was often the environment that changed things. Because when I started out as a scientist, you either went into academia or you joined large pharma. And then once you'd made that decision, you were pretty much locked in for the rest of your career. I imagine, and I'm guessing, when you joined ICI, people would join at quite early in their careers and maybe stay through to retirement. And certainly Pfizer in those days, I was down in Pfizer in Sandwich, people would join from school and retire at 60, 65, and that was seen as a normal career progression. I think over that period, there's a lot more dynamism. People are moving from company to company and that sort of thing. So I think we're much more mobile than we were. And certainly in my experience, it was the environment was changing in which that could be enabled. So we started a company that was one of the first, CROs, a bit like around the sort of time of Cerebus that Alan Palmer mentioned earlier. This was seen as quite a new thing. And so we thought, well, there's a new opportunity here. So we responded to the environment. My view is it's not innate, but I'm happy to be challenged by better human geneticists.
Yes, yeah. Zahra, what do you think? Is it in your genes?
No, I mean, there are some skills. I think there's a question in there that you need.
Yeah, come on to that. Yeah.
We're all different, and it's something I've noticed by being through accelerators, talking to the people here. We've all got different personality traits. Some of us are introverts, some of us are extroverts. It doesn't really matter at all what your personality traits are when you want to be an entrepreneur. I think there are some skills that you could have. I think one of the important ones that was important to me is being self-aware. And I would encourage, people who want to be entrepreneurs to really work on that, understand yourself, what your limitations are, what you're really good at, and where you need the help, and be humble around that, and accept that then you want to create a team of people that are together. You're going to be brilliant. You're not going to be brilliant on your own in everything. And identifying yourself and knowing what you're really good at and getting people on board with you who compensate for you is one of the key things you can do.
Yeah. Okay, well, yeah, there's a question in the chat box. What are the top 3 skills that you think are most important to be a successful entrepreneur in this sector? So do you, just ask the panel, do you think you need to have special skills? And, you know, what, you know, to be an entrepreneur?
I mean, I think to answer a little bit of both questions, and it was quite interesting. So I spoke to the founder of Entrepreneur First, and obviously like they see hundreds of people a year like go through and which one's successful and not. And the one kind of, in a way, skill that really stood out as the companies that succeeded was resilience. And that was it. You had, as you say, kind of introverts, extroverts, this and that. But I think really ambition, determination, and resilience, I think those, and some of it are developed. I've seen people that aren't resilient, you know, didn't used to be resilient, and, you know, were doing a faff over over nothing and everything, and through life kind of things happened and it became resilient. So I think it's not necessarily you're born with. Some people are born with some of those 3 skills more than others, but I think to me, that's the ones where I really see stand out with the people around me that I see succeed. And generally, I don't know if it's even just in entrepreneurship, but I think in general, and really having a successful career, because I think there's no easy path to success, no matter whether it's through entrepreneurship or others.
Jeroen, have you got special skills?
Well, that's a big question, I think. I don't know if I got special skills really myself. I think thinking about the skills for an entrepreneur and whether or not it's innate and genetic or not, I think people do have things that they're innate or sort of like genetically, I guess, better at than other people. But of course, there's a lot of things that we can learn as well. And I think people would, for instance, argue that a skill like being a risk taker, for example, embracing that is useful as an entrepreneur. But I also think that if you are a bit too extravagant in your risk taking, you will also never succeed at scaling a company and ultimately exiting that company and turning it into a success. So I think if you are a risk taker, maybe it could be a good start, but you'll also have to learn about de-risking and sort of like balancing that. And I think a lot of skills have their counterparts and sort of balancing counter skill, if you will. For example, you would say that entrepreneurs need to be bold and go after their own ideas. But then again, you don't want to work in silos. So you also have to be good at speaking to people, listening to people. And again, I think this view of an entrepreneur being somebody who is a bit extroverted and a bit of a, let's say, a bully or something like that, that doesn't really exist that much anymore. I mean, there's been a lot of reports recently in the last 5 years or so about how the new wave entrepreneurs have better empathy and emotional intelligence. And this is something that sort of like helps drive the growth of the company as well. So I think for every sort of like skill, there's a counter skill, which is useful. You might have one and need to develop the other, or vice versa.
Yeah. I think that there are three things behind being a successful entrepreneur. It's tough work. So the first one is that you have to have an area that you're passionate about. So you have to find something that you're passionate about, because if you're not passionate about it, you're not going to follow through and have the energy to follow it through. The second is you have to have a competitive edge. You have to have something that you're best in the world at. And the third, you have to see a way that you can make money out of those. So if those 3 are in place, and it's very hard to plan for this, if these 3 are in place, then you can form a successful company. But setting out just to do that on its own is difficult to. So it's getting into a position where you're aware of the possibility, and when they align, you can then form a company.
Okay, no, that's very useful. Now, again, there's a question in the chat box about failure. And as a panel of entrepreneurs, have you dealt with setbacks in your careers? My view is actually I probably learned more from the failures and what hasn't gone well than what has gone well. I don't know, what do you think, Marc? What about that?
I think this is a very good point, and I think there are big cultural differences in terms of our attitude to failure around the world. You know, it's probably a bit of a mythology, but you know, Americans often see failure as you just described it, something that makes you pick yourself up, you get back on your horse and you try it again. And maybe, you know, in a European culture, we're a bit more averse to failure. We'll go away and hide. So I do think that being resilient and saying, actually, I'm going to learn for this and come back is very important. And again, you know, maybe there are certain people who are more resilient to failure, or it's maybe just a cultural thing. And I think certainly in business culture, you know, if you look at a lot of the American entrepreneurs, you know, and if we go back to the 1970s, when you have the likes of Cetus and Amgen and Genentech, you know, it took them a little while to actually focus on what they were going to make their money on, whether it was PCR or human growth hormones or insulin or whatever it was. But once they found that focus, they got there and they did it. So the early experiments were quickly sort of used, and then they developed a focus on what was going to make them great companies. And I think that's possibly why the US is all perceived as being, you know, the hotbed of it, particularly California. You know, that you could argue it's that cowboy mentality that enabled them to get going. So I would argue, yes, it's important, and maybe it's an environmental thing, because I'm going down a little theme here.
Yeah, Benjamina, you've probably become an entrepreneur more recently than some of us on the panel. Do you worry about failure?
I mean, do I worry about it? Yes. But, you know, I think you kind of have to accept that it's part of the journey. I think it's learning. I think it's really about learning to get back up, right? I think it's important to not completely, and at least for me, it's been important to not completely ignore it. And there's been times where, you know, shit hits the fan, and it's, you know, I let myself kind of be upset, and I'm like, okay, well, you're going to have this amount of time to be upset and let yourself go. But from there, you really need to act on it and try and resolve it. And I think it's just the mentality of really continuing no matter what. And yeah, and being resilient. But yeah, it's always easy. Even if you tell someone you're going to get punched in the face, it still hurts when you do get punched in the face, right? No matter how much people warn you and this and that, I think it's also, you never know usually when it happens, right? And I think it's the unpredictability that people have to be comfortable with.
Yeah. No, that's fine. And sort of coupled with this, Zahra, there's another question here. Have you got an example of something that's happened that's pivotal really to your business and your career to, you know, help you grow on that, whether it be a failure or a success?
Goodness, that's a big question. I mean, we're a very new company. We only incorporated less than a year ago, so we haven't had that many pivotal moments. I mean, I guess my own personality type, I kind of talk myself out of things quite a lot and actually doubt whether I have things. So for me, the successes, like being able to get on accelerator programs, pitching and being able to get money in, it's definitely great. These are pivotal moments for the company that we're able to move forwards with, and it's been brilliant. With the failures and things, I mean, touching a little bit on what the panel's been saying, I've always used my mentors. When things go wrong, I go and cry on their shoulders. Some of the ones that I think will hear, and they'll listen, and then they'll help formulate a plan. So that's another reason why mentors are great, because you can actually, you know, go and talk to them and say, oh, this has happened, and what do you think? Like, oh yeah, that's happened to me millions of times before. Don't worry, this is what you need to do next, or you could do this, and it just helps you kind of formulate a plan. But yeah, we haven't had any pivotal moments yet, you know, in our journey.
Yeah, I mean, from my own career, as I mentioned, you know, I and the team took one of the first gene therapy up to registration, the EMA product called Serapro. Didn't make it, and at that time we've raised all that money. We were listed on the main London market. We were worth about £250 million as a market capitalization. I owned a large share of that, and overnight it evaporated. Now that was a failure. That was quite a big failure, but that actually encouraged me, and a lot of the investors that I work with encouraged me to set up the consultancy practice to help companies move forward. And now here we are 20 years later, we've got, what, 11 gene therapies approved, and we've worked on about 7 of them. So I actually learned from that failure. The one thing about Cerepride, I don't actually think it was a failure. It actually laid the ground for everything that's happened. We showed it could be done and take that forward. So actually, I look on it as a success. That people think, well, you failed. No, I don't think so. But anyway, with that. So what about, let's just, this might be a controversial question, but are there any differences between male and female entrepreneurs? So who wants to go first on that one?
I mean, I'm happy to start. And
yeah,
I think, you know, there's different as well. I mean, I faced, I guess, the triangle of death, I say, between biotech, being a female entrepreneur, and being young, right? Which, you know, you do have a lot of connotations. And I think if you have one of those 3 that is not right, it sometimes is easier. But I think those 3 have, in combination, I've had a lot of, you know, comments around that. And I think you sometimes, you know, the biases that are there, the biases where you know, you sit in a meeting and someone tells you up front, you know, I've had someone tell me sitting in a meeting within about 5 minutes, don't you think it should be a guy with a bit more white hair running this business? And I'm like, well, I don't know what to answer to this. But, you know, you have the ones that are up front, you have the unconscious bias, but I think it's trying to just work on doing your best. And there are some times where it's worked in an advantage. There's been panels where I've been invited to bring diversity, and it's been clear and it's been told to me. But you know what? Great. It's a little bit counteracts all the times where there's been that counter bias. And there's been, again, articles, things like that, that we've been put in the spotlight because of that, to try and counteract. So I think the advice I'd say is don't feel bad when you know you're giving the opportunity, because to try and be a diversity. And the times where you get hard comments, you know, just take it as a hard comment and try and move on. It has been sometimes, you know, harder in terms of fundraising and so on, but I think it's you learn and you do it, and at the end it's the end results that come. And I think, Alan, what you said, you know, people see it as a failure, but later on it's when you look back on time, right, that matters.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've had to reach out to 800 to 900 investors to get our seed round together, which is a lot more than others, but it doesn't matter. We got there and we did great results with it. So,
well, clearly you score high on tenacity, don't you? That's have to work on that. Zahra, any of your views on this?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Benjamina. It does exist. There are differences. I mean, there's differences in how women lead and differences how men lead. Anyway, that's why I'm saying, like, when you set up your team, make sure you have that diversity there, because actually we all approach different things differently. I mean, I just don't think about it, because if you start thinking about this, then you could just work yourself up. So I just accept it that I didn't make it through because my idea wasn't great. I just don't bring the gender thing into my agenda at all, or anything else, because I'm not just a woman, I'm a woman of color as well, essentially. So, but I think the world entrepreneurial scene is changing as well. Like, they're looking to diversify, and they're encouraging women to step forward. There's more and more available for women to, you know, like Benjamin being invited to panels and things. So, you know, I just don't think about it.
No. I mean, in my experience, in fact, some of the best CEOs I've worked with are female, actually. So it's different. Marc or Alan, Jeroen, any comments on this?
I mean, maybe I'll kick off. Yes, I think, you know, obviously it's having, you know, role models and successful people, you know, that you can say, well, I can do that too. And I certainly think when I started out, I saw a big difference, actually, and I don't know if statistically valid, between academia and industry. In academia, I can't remember of a single female professor at Cambridge University. I mean, probably there were, but I never came across one. Whereas when I moved to Pfizer, there were a lot of female directors. So certainly industry, I think, was more progressive in those days than academia was. And if we think it was only Cambridge University, only it's 100 years ago, where women were actually put out in Girton College on the outskirts of the city, and the men were locked in, or the women locked out, or vice versa. Just how things have changed, in a relatively short period of time. So my view is, I think absolutely the world has changed, and for the better. And I think that environmental change encourages people to say, I can do that too. So that would be my view.
Yeah. Alan?
Yeah.
Jeroen?
It's summed up nicely by a quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson. He said that there are always two parties, the parties of the past and the party of the future, the establishment and the movement. And to be an entrepreneur, you can't be part of the establishment, you have to be part of the movement. Yeah. So this speaks to the male-female bias as well.
Yeah, that's good. Jeroen?
Yeah, and I also have to say that it's been actually quite exciting to see that in a lot of the sort of accelerator programs, etc., that you see in and around Cambridge and London, it's more or less a 50-50 split between sort of female and male entrepreneurs, if not sometimes even more female entrepreneurs sometimes, certainly in the life sciences. I see Benjamina sort of like maybe not completely agreeing there.
Not all the ones that I've been part of.
Same here. Like I'm the only woman on Accelerate at Abraham this year.
Oh wow, that's interesting. But I think there's also the emergence of like all female venture capital firms and these kind of things as well, which I think is also a step in the right direction. We don't need to create a divide or something like that, but just to put us a bit more on everybody's radar and get these opportunities out there. And of course, there are maybe some more bold individuals, potentially like Benjamina and Zahra, who are not easily intimidated. But if you are potentially a little bit more easily intimidated, that should not be a barrier for you to go into this world as well. So it's good that sort of like more sort of routes for many people actually sort of are being established. So yeah.
And I just want to pick up really and build on something that Marc said earlier, in his early career. And I experienced this really with, it used to be just big pharma. And then we saw, Americans setting up spin-out companies and small startup companies. And, in the sort of late 80s, 90s, that's what came here. And the other change I've noticed now is, shall we say, the age of people setting up companies, and I think Benjamina and Zahra and Jeroen, you're a good example. We're seeing younger people stepping out and setting up companies. And if listening to your careers and what you've done, the experiences that some of you had flipping in and out of academia into into pharma industry, doing other jobs. So I suppose my question is, can you become an entrepreneur at any age, or do you need to have experience and build up some skills and perhaps had failures and have the edges knocked off you before you can become an entrepreneur? What do you think? Alan, what about you?
Yeah, I think that there's a balance here, because the longer you stay in the establishment, the more institutionalized you become. So that gives the advantage for younger people. But on the other hand, having some wisdom and experience of the world would be helpful. So for an early entrepreneur, I think having a mentor would be very, very, very helpful indeed to guide them through that process.
Marc?
Sorry. So just repeat the question. Sorry, my internet was not as stable as it should have been.
I was just saying the age of entrepreneur seems to be falling, and building up, what you said with companies starting to fall.
No, I agree. I think you can do this at any age. I think, why I sort of resisted early on the career analogy, because a career says, as you probably know from medicine, you start off as a, junior doctor and you work your way up through the system and so on and so forth. I think it's much more dynamic now, and I think yes, there should be no ageism as well. I don't see why someone shouldn't start their own business when they've retired. And in fact, I'm working on a business at the moment with somebody who is a clinician, actually retired after a full year of career of clinical service to the NHS, and now has had time to start, his own business. And I'm working on that with him at the moment. So I think ageism should be irrelevant. And I've just seen actually someone says, do you need a PhD? And I would say absolutely not. You know, I think you need to be it helps to be a scientist, but I don't think you have to be a scientist. And I don't think the PhD helps you do research. It doesn't necessarily help you and train you to be an entrepreneur. So I wouldn't say that was a gate at all in my opinion.
No, that's interesting, because I have one CEO I'm working with. He's made all his money in telecoms, and never been in life sciences, and he's slowly learning. But you know, he did ask me a while ago, why does a 3-month toxicology study take 3 months? Can't you make it shorter? And he nearly fell off his chair when I said a 3-month toxicology study probably takes us 6 months, actually, if not longer. But it's that sort of knowledge, isn't it? But you can learn it with that. So, I mean, Benjamina and Zahra, do you think, you know, what's your view about, you know, starting so early? Because clearly it's, you know, it's been a risk in your career and things like that. What do you think?
I mean, I think it's knowing what are the advantages and disadvantages of doing it. And I think what I don't like is I see sometimes people around my age starting a business and being like, well, experience doesn't matter. It really, really does. So I think dismissing it and saying experience doesn't matter is the wrong way of going about it. It's not because experience matters that you can't start a business early. It's just being conscious of it and surrounding yourself with the people that have the experience that can help you. And I think it does have to be more than mentors, to be honest. I think it has to really be within the core team. And we've seen it, for example, you know, having our CSO, our COO, our VP of operations, both have a lot more experience than I do. And it helps. And having me come and ask stupid questions like the one you've just mentioned helps. And sometimes it is possible to do it faster, and sometimes it isn't. And I think it comes back to the diversity, and vice versa. If you start maybe later on, you want to surround yourself with people that are younger in their career so that they challenge and ask the questions, do we still need to do things in the same exact way? And I think it's really back to diversity in a broader sense of things and knowing where your weaknesses are.
Yeah. Okay. Jeroen, any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, sure. I think, yeah, very much in line with what Benjamina said as well. I think every year reports come out around what the most successful, or what the average age is of the most successful entrepreneurs. And this year that was 45 years, essentially. So there is definitely a benefit of having potentially a couple of white hairs on your head and having that experience. And I think, again, this comes down to the failures and experiences. Of course, if you've started a business and failed, you're going to be more successful in doing another one. But I think on the flip side, though, the advantage that some people who are a bit younger have is that they're still early in their career. And you talked about the risk, Alan, there in terms of your career development. To some extent, it's less risky, I think, to do a startup or create your own company early in life, because you still have a bit more sort of flexibility in life and you can take on a bit more risk. Of course, if you are, let's say, 40 and you have lots of people to take care of and you don't want to lose that stability in life, it is a bit more, dangerous, I guess, to some extent, to sort of embark on letting everything sort of fall behind and start a new company. So again, it's a balancing act, I think, there.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I mean, I think there is technology's opened up, huge opportunities to people to make a lot of money from their bedroom. You know, they can be whatever an influencer is. I don't know what it is, but you can do that. And with relatively little capital, I guess where our sector is different is that actually it does need labs and a lot of investment. So I do think that in other sectors, you can, whatever it is, make a lot of money quite quickly by, selling something on the internet. And that isn't always sort of, it's not a drag and drop into life sciences in many situations. So that's just my view.
Like, back to your definition that you said at the start, right? You're an entrepreneur takes a financial risk. Are you actually taking a financial risk? I know companies that, didn't do anything, were just, okay, well, we're going to start a business. Here's 2 million, pay yourself a salary of, 200K, you put zero money in and fantastic. And there, it's maybe easier to start it later because you take no financial risk. Whereas if you do take a financial risk, you put your own money, then it's a different equation.
Yeah. Well, that was going to be my next question. Sorry, we've only got 5 minutes to go. So quick question. Do you consider yourself risk takers? Are you taking risks?
No, not at all. I'm the most risk averse person you'll ever meet, and especially in my job. So as a scientist, I don't take risks. I'm very careful. So you can be an entrepreneur without taking, you take some risks, but I'm not a big risk taker at all. Yeah, that's my view.
No, that's good. Alan, are you a risk taker?
I think it's, to be an entrepreneur, you've got to look at things differently. So you're moving in an area where other people have moved in, but you've done the calculations, you know the landscape, and so the risk is relatively low. So the challenge then becomes your ability to persuade other people to part with their money to support your idea.
Yeah.
So no, I don't think, because risk sounds reckless. Being an entrepreneur isn't an area where you can be reckless.
Yeah. Jeroen?
Well, my co-founder sometimes tells me that I'm a person who likes a lot of risk with not a lot of reward sometimes in life. So I think I would consider myself potentially a risk taker, but again, like Zahra and Alan said, too much risk doesn't really help you grow your business. And again, to Benjamina's point as well earlier, surrounding yourself with the right individuals. I mean, I'm very much an optimist and a risk taker myself, whereas my co-founder is, I will say, a realist and a little bit more structured, and that makes us a good team as well. And that's why I think we're going to be able to scale this up. But I consider myself some form of a risk taker, I would say. Yeah.
Marc?
Yes and no. I'd say yes, you have to take some risk to start a company, right? I mean, there is no zero risk option. But I would say, mitigating that risk. So, for example, when I lived down in Kent, you could work for Pfizer or you could work for the university. There was no other, coal mining had disappeared. So there wasn't a third option. So basically we moved to Cambridge to set it up, because if company A doesn't work, there may be company B and company C. So yes, I think you can be a risk taker in an environment which mitigates risk, would be my thoughts.
Okay, all right. Okay, we need to close. Now, let's just come back to the first question. Is being an entrepreneur a career? And I think, I think from what I've, if I look back on mine, I think being an entrepreneur has been part of my career, as opposed to, I didn't set out to become an entrepreneur. In fact, I still don't think I am one, but I do meet the definition. So, Benjamina, is your a career as an entrepreneur?
I don't think so. I think as you, it's part of the career.
Yeah. Marc, I think I know your answer.
Just to be consistent, so I'm not going to change my opinion now. No, basically anything I've done that's entrepreneurial has just been happenstance, if I'm to be brutally honest.
Yes, yeah. Jeroen?
Couple of clicking mistakes there, I apologize. I think some quote unquote entrepreneurs are probably less entrepreneurial than a lot of scientists out there. So I don't think per se, being an entrepreneur is a career. It's more a state of mind, I guess.
Yeah. Alan?
No, I don't think it's a career, but it's important to have something first before the name entrepreneur. So for example, I'm a neuroscientist and an entrepreneur. Being an entrepreneur on your own, you can't just setting out to make money. I don't think necessarily works. You've got to have something that you're passionate about other than money.
Yes, yeah. In fact, I think money's great and it's nice to make the money, but actually I don't think money drives, certainly from what I've talking to you in the last hour, I don't think money's driving any of you. It's doing that. So Zahra, final word from you. Do you see it as a career?
It's not a career, it's a means for me to get what I want. That's how I see it.
That's it. Okay. No, well, thank you very much. I've enjoyed the discussions. Hope everybody else has. We've had some good audience participation questions coming forward. I know we haven't been able to answer all of them, but so just thank you. Thanks to all my panelists and thanks for a great discussion. So Alicia, back to you. It's 11:30.
Hang on, wonderful. Thank you so much, Alan, and to all of the panel. Yeah, what a wonderful diversity of experiences and opinions, really valuable. I've been informed that the panel has very kindly put some resources together about programs to support entrepreneurs. So that is very greatly appreciated and hopefully will go some way to helping others with their progress. I just wanted to take the opportunity to say that voting for the Life Science Inspiration of the Year Award will be closing in half an hour. So I've dropped the link in the chat box for anyone who would like to go and view the candidates and cast a vote. And then we'll be announcing the winner as part of the last panel discussion this afternoon. We're breaking now to give you some time to grab some food bits and a drink, and hopefully you'll join us at 12:15 for the panel discussion on Do Role Models Make Great Mentors? So thanks once again to the panel for their time and sharing their insights, and to the delegates for dropping in, and please use the conference app to continue the conversation. So thank you very much, everyone, and take care. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Bye.